welcome to this special show on Davos 2015 as we look back at all the news and views that we brought to you through the course of this week. On this show, we're focusing on Leaders Speak, what global leaders had to say to us about the challenges facing them in these difficult economic times. You're going to hear from Martin Sorrell, Steve Pagliuca, John Studzinski, John Nelson, and Lutfi Siddiqui, who's a young global leader. Let me start first with what Martin Sorrell had to say about the kind of growth that is available in the global economy right now and the regions that he thinks are going to be best performing.
Overall, it's a little bit better than, our budgets are a little bit better than 2014. I've not seen the final figures for 2014, but if I look at our budgets for 2015, which we haven't quite finalized, but pretty much there, they look a little bit better. So 3% plus like-for-like growth across the world. US doing well, UK continuing to do well, although there's uncertainty around the election. Western continental Europe, France, Italy and Spain still under pressure, Spain less so, Germany in reasonable shape. Eastern Europe, Russia and Ukraine obviously very difficult. If you go to America, as I said, US very strong. I think it's a G2 year, it's US and China really. I'll come back to India in a second. Latin America very a little bit better than last year, but the pattern in Mexico we're still seeing, we were waiting for liftoff. Brazil obviously has been troubled a little bit last year, slowed down quite significantly. You've got issues around oil for Colombia, although it was doing well, and Peru sort of flattened out a bit. And then you've got Argentina and Venezuela with problems. Africa is generally strong growth, but the problems in Nigeria, security, corruption issues, Nigeria is the China of Africa, make it difficult. Middle East very varied. And then if you go to Asia, Japan's still very difficult. Australia and New Zealand difficult. The stuff in between, if I can put this, India into the stuff in between, India is strong. India, we had a good year last year, and I'm looking at the budgets, it will be a very good year this year. The Modi effect, pre-Modi, Modi election effect, post-election effect has been very good. So I'm very bullish. Of the four BRICS, you know, India is the star at the moment, and long may it continue. As you know, we've been an unashamed Indian bull, just like we've been an unashamed Chinese bull too, and that goes for Russia as well, and Brazil. Russia is a bit dented at the moment, and hopefully in time that will get better. I think Brazil will. So we're still BRICS mad, madmen and mad women, and matsmen and
Matsmen, I think is what you called yourself.
But you know, in essence, this year will be very similar to last year, a little bit better. Functionally, it's media and digital that drives the operations.
Blackstone's John Studzinski had an interesting insight on new forms of weaponization. Here's what he had to say to me earlier in the week.
You see a lot of chief executives and a lot of statesmen saying, well, you know, the world is a very stable place because we haven't had any major conflicts in the world. Clearly you had a lot of militarization in places like Afghanistan and Iraq and the Mideast. But what you're seeing more and more is this notion of military incursions. It's sort of an 18th, 19th, and 20th century model. And actually, I think what we need to think through more carefully now is the use of finance, which you saw, and how the Americans and the Europeans have reacted towards instituting sanctions towards President Putin and Russia. And what that's caused is a lot of the states around Russia haven't been able to have the same type of funding, including Venezuela, Cuba. And what that's caused to a certain extent is a burgeoning of the shadow banking system, which of course we talk about trying to control, actually by putting one constraint on Putin and putting financial constraints on Russia. You're actually almost encouraging the shadow banking system. So finance is one weapon. Energy prices. The Saudis, very focused on maintaining their market share, very focused. And you know, there are all these sort of cloak and dagger theories that the Americans and the Saudis are collaborating, trying to sort of manage the oil price down to put pressure on Iran, Iraq, ISIS, Russia, Venezuela. That's rubbish. The Saudis are focused on maintaining their own status in the world as the world's leading oil producer. A position that the Americans in the last couple of years, because of shale, are challenging.
Yeah.
So this is the Saudis, A, trying to assume that role globally, but B, also trying to enhance their position and make sure they continue to be seen as a dominant economy and a dominant source of power in the Mideast. So energy is the second weapon. And the third one, which we're all very naive about, and you saw this with the Sony hacking, is technology, coding, and what you and I commonly refer to as cyber terrorism.
Right.
And I think everyone, and I hope the Indian government's focused on this, the ability for one government to be hostile towards another by hacking into their, we saw it the other day, hacking into the American Defense Twitter communication system, which was a bit of almost a warning, a bit of a joke, but a bit of a warning. What does that symbolize in terms of being able to hack into a major money center bank and actually cause it to cease operations for 24 hours? How does the consumer react to that in terms of consumer liquidity in the market, or the banking system have to freeze or stay put? So that's another form of weapon. So the weaponization of finance, energy, and technology, I think we have to see this is the 21st century tactics, and we have to really revise our foreign policy and our thinking more along those lines. And I'm not sure most governments prioritize it enough. They clearly do, but it's, and I think President Obama the other day talked about this as needing to be part of Homeland Security and not necessarily something that was part of the military or the security branch only. And I think he's right. It is Homeland Security.
But John, these are big, out-of-businesses league problems.
They are.
If global business leaders come to you and say, John, what should I be prepared for in 2015? How do you take this, the key threats that you have just pointed out, and make it into something that they can sort of mitigate in some fashion? How does business navigate this?
Well, I think business, there's a whole lot of other things the C-suite or the chairman's suite has to focus on. Number one, they have to be prepared for a volatile year. Number two, with this perception of the gap between the rich and the poor, they have to be perceived that their compensation structures, remuneration structures are going to be under much greater scrutiny. Number three, we haven't talked about talent management, but I think you and I both know that the best and brightest coming out of Indian universities or American universities don't all want to work anymore for big companies. There's a big focus on entrepreneurialism, there's a big focus on small, there's a big focus on transparency, and there's a big focus on doing things that are both financially rewarding but have some social impact. So I think if you're so volatility, focusing on the perception of compensation structures and remuneration and narrowing that gap, but also talent management, realizing that the best people now are not necessarily the ones who are going to go into a majority of the big industries. Many of them want to go into technology, many of them want to work in their own businesses, they want to be entrepreneurs. So if you're a big company, you've got to try to somehow deal with those issues and to create the culture that's going to allow that talent to flourish or to feel comfortable. But I think it's going to be a very rocky year, and I don't think all these things we're looking at, like quantitative easing in Europe and a number of things that are happening in Asia, are necessarily going to stabilize the environment. And I think lastly, and I'll shut up, we have to stop looking at everything as being economically driven. There are too many issues in the world that relate to the common man. And I think one of the reasons why Pope Francis is actually such a formidable leader today, and actually I think your Prime Minister Modi is very good at this, is leaders have to speak in a way that everyone can understand them. And I think leadership of the 21st century is not about being too clever, too political. It's being very simple sentences, simple messages, and actually living the way you speak. Role models.
Mr. Modi is very good at that.
He is very good at that, but that's what I'm saying. That's leadership for the 21st century, because social media makes it all the more difficult if you basically don't do as you say.
We also spoke to private equity leader Steve Pagliuca of Bain. Here's what Steve thinks 2015 will bring for the private equity industry.
last year, Bain Capital sold a lot of properties. I think we sold $10 billion of properties. Our companies had appreciated dramatically, and it continues this year. With that being said, the monetary expansion has made it it's tough to be a buyer.
Right.
Many things we're looking at we think are overpriced in terms of cycles. That's the bad news. The good news is we've created a large company. We have 1,000 people, and we're doing all sorts of creative deals that we think can make money for our investors.
Are these big ticket deals? Is the age of buyouts, has it come back, or still?
I think it's coming back. We're looking at larger and larger transactions. The debt markets are there. It's been more of a question of the price for the assets. Large assets have had large price tags and haven't justified the premiums that we could pay in the past. So it's not that we can't do it. It's that it doesn't look attractive right now.
Is it just higher equity prices? So we've seen that play out through the course of the year, not just in the U.S., but in many emerging markets like India as well? Or is it a degree of caution? Because the last I read, the private equity business was sitting on $1 trillion in cash, not yet feeling confident enough to put it to work?
We've still maintained a pretty good investment pace within that. So you just have to be more selective. And, we've gone down to the mid-market. We've got some exciting software companies. We've got some exciting retail companies. And you've got to have a plan where the company's going to take share, because there's not as much fundamental growth left as there was in the post-2000 period. So if you're selective, private equity can be a very, very good asset class. We've just raised 2 new funds. Both have been oversubscribed. So that shows you that investors like the performance they get out of private equity.
And you're going to put most of that money in the U.S., or do other areas, maybe like India, look more promising than they did 12 months ago?
Well, India is certainly on paper, with Modi coming in and having a great impact on the stock market, for sure. There are great signs of hope. I think we talked last year of some of the reforms that were needed in India, in terms of employment rules, in terms of the ease of starting a business, in terms of the rule of law. And Modi is saying all the right things. When he comes to the U.S., he's drawing, I think he sold out Madison Square Garden.
Big crowds, yes.
And he seems to really be having an energizing effect on that. But as they say, Rome wasn't built in a day. It's going to be a 2 to 3 year process. Private equity has not followed that yet. I think we're roughly half of foreign direct investment, and it's staying at that level. It hasn't increased, because I think people are waiting to see, are these things going to get traction? Will they continue to go in the right direction? Okay.
So what are you most excited about in 2015?
Well, I'm excited about the progress the U.S. has made, and hopefully continued progress. I'm excited that there is a sense that the world wants to unite to really try to work together to damp out terrorism. It's been in all the conferences here, and they're talking about it at the UN. It's now become everyone's problem, which I think is a good thing. And I'm hoping some stability will emerge at the end of 2015. So we're talking here next year, and we're saying next year is a good year because we have some more stability. Some of the monetary issues in Europe have gone through, and the U.S. is still doing well. So that's my hope.
All right, let's take a quick break. But when we come back, we speak to John Nelson of Lloyd's, and we also speak to young global leader Lutfi Siddiqui of UBS.